History is an ever constant learning experience. But with all this talk about bringing back Confederate statues and names, I think we should really take a look at what the Confederacy, the traitors of the Confederacy, did to the U.S. military men that they captured, and look at the absolute horrors that they put them through in Andersonville. This is the Continuum. In February 1864, the Confederacy faced an escalating crisis. The Southern Confederacy had captured so many Union forces that prisons were starting to overflow. To handle the influx, Confederate authorities established Camp Sumter, later known as Andersonville, in a remote and isolated part of southern Georgia. The stockades covered 26 acres, surrounded by 15-foot wooden walls reinforced with sharpened logs. Watchtowers dotted the perimeter, manned by armed guards, often inexperienced and unsympathetic to the prisoners they observed. Though the camp was only built for 10,000 men, the camp quickly filled with over 30,000 Union soldiers. Men arrived in weakened states, starving and sick from forced marches known as prisoner marches, where food and water were scarce and disease was rampant. Mud and filth coated every surface. Rats and lice infected every corner. Shelters were nearly non-existent. Some prisoners dug shallow pits in the earth, while others improvised lean-tos from branches and scraps of clothing. From the moment of arrival, despair gripped the prisoners. Starvation and disease were already present, and the lack of sanitation and basic necessities made survival uncertain. The camp was not only overcrowded, but mismanaged. The Confederate authorities provided minimal food, medical care, and protection. Andersonville was a crucible of suffering, designed to confine, control, and slowly break the human spirit. Inside Andersonville, daily life was a relentless struggle against hunger, disease, and filth. Prisoners awoke in mud and makeshift shelters, often to the cries of the sick and dying. Rations were meager, a handful of cornmeal, a few beans, sometimes a small scrap of bacon. Food was often spoiled, contaminated, or stolen by other prisoners, driven by desperation. Water came from a stockade branch, a small creek contaminated by human waste. Drinking it caused widespread dysentery, typhoid, and other waterborne illnesses. Overcrowding accelerated the spread of diseases. Medical care was nearly non-existent, as only a few Confederate surgeons struggled to treat thousands of sick and dying men without sufficient supplies. Despite these conditions, prisoners attempted to maintain a semblance of routine. Roll calls, ration lines, and rudimentary work details structured the day. Survival depended on resourcefulness. Men scavenged for roots, caught rats, and scavenged scraps of clothes or leather for food. Every act of survival required ingenuity, courage, and cooperation. A few feet from the stockade walls ran the deadline, an invisible line. Step beyond it, and guards would fire without hesitation. Escape attempts were met with immediate execution or severe punishment. Dogs were trained to intimidate and attack prisoners attempting to flee. Minor infractions, such as being late to roll call, speaking disrespectfully, or attempting to find food, were punished by beating and public humiliation. Guards enforced a regime of terror designed to keep prisoners subdued. Isolation, hunger, and the constant threat of death had profound psychological effects. Many men descended into despair and madness. Letters from home were stolen or destroyed, cutting off the only contact to the outside world. The daily existence of prisoners was one of fear, suffering, and vigilance. Hunger was omnipresent. Starvation drove men to extreme measures, eating roots, rats, insects, or the leather from shoes and belts. Corpses often remained unburied for days, contaminating the environment and worsening sickening diseases. Corpses often remained unburied for days, contaminating the environment and worsening disease outbreaks. By the summer of 1864, the camp experienced over 100 deaths per day. Food scarcity, combined with unsanitary conditions, created a lethal environment. Starvation was not a mere incidental. It was magnified by neglect and deliberate obstruction of aid. Hunger defined every action, thought, and strategy of survival within the stockade. Disease was rampant. Dysentery, scurvy, typhoid, and smallpox tore through the camp. Contaminated water, decaying corpses, overcrowding, and exposure created the perfect conditions for outbreaks. Medical care was minimal, leaving the sick to struggle alone. Prisoners often lay in mud beside the dead with flies and vermin everywhere. The psychological burden was immense. Watching friends die, surviving on scraps, and knowing that little aid would arrive. Systemic neglect, including the refusal to properly feed, treat, and shelter prisoners, constituted an intentional cruelty that approached criminality. The Union attempted to send aid through the United States Sanitary Commission and private relief committees. Packages of food, clothing, and medicine was sent, along with letters from families. Confederate authorities often blocked, confiscated, or delayed these supplies. Some shipments languished in warehouse for months. Rumors of relief occasionally reached prisoners, offering fleeting hope, but many died before aid arrived. Starvation, disease, and exposure continued, exacerbated by the deliberate obstruction of relief by Confederate officials. Despite the extreme conditions, prisoners organized ways to help one another. Informal networks distributed food, dug latrines, and cared for the sick. Minor acts, sharing a scrap of bread or comforting the dying, offered hope and defiance. Escape attempts were dangerous, but persisted. Although most failed, they demonstrated courage and resilience. Prisoners also shared knowledge of surviving diseases, rationing food, and protecting weaker men. Humanity persisted, even amidst systemic cruelty. Accounts of individual prisoners highlight the scale of suffering. Young soldiers never returned home. Older men succumbed to illness, and comrades comforted the dying. Diaries and letters documented theft, beatings, starvation, and disease, providing insight into daily life, the resilience required to survive. These personal accounts serve as enduring records preserving the memory of suffering, courage, and survival for prosperity. Captain Henry Wirtz, the commandant, oversaw daily operations at Andersonville. He enforced brutal discipline, allowing starvation, permitting executions, failing to provide adequate medical care. After the war, Wirtz was captured, tried, and executed for war crimes. Testimony revealed deliberate neglect, abuse, and obstruction of relief. Wirtz's trial highlighted systemic cruelty at Andersonville, establishing legal accountability, even as many of the Confederate officials avoided justice. Escape attempts were frequent but rarely successful. Prisoners were shot on the deadline, tortured, or publicly executed for attempting flight. Harsh punishments installed fear and maintained control. Despite the danger, successful escapes occasionally occurred, offering hope and demonstrating resilience and ingenuity in the face of extreme oppression. In April 1865, Union forces liberated Andersonville. Thousands of emancipated soldiers emerged from the stockade, many barely able to stand. Corpses littered the camp. Relief finally reached the prisoners, though for many it came too late. Witnesses documented the starvation, executions, and disease. The liberation revealed the full scale of human suffering, confronting the deliberate neglect and cruelty that defined life in the camps. Today, Andersonville is a National Historical Site. Graves, monuments, and memorials honor more than 13,000 men who perished. The camps serve as a warning of the consequences of systematic cruelty, neglect, and deliberate indifference. Yet the stories of prisoners also reveal the persistence of the human spirit. Acts of courage, solidarity, and defiance endure even in unimaginable conditions. Andersonville is both a record of suffering and a testament to endurance, resilience, and the need to confront cruelty wherever it arises. Isn't it absurd that in Nazi Germany in 1945, when they liberated those camps, they found hundreds of thousands of people starving, suffering from disease, dying. But yet, we don't remember Andersonville, even though those were U.S. POWs, U.S. servicemen who were held in unimaginable conditions. They were put there in camp without shelter. Food that was sent by the Union to feed them was purposely withheld from them. Medical supplies was withheld from them. Some Southern surgeons didn't even care to do a job there to help people. They preferred to let them die. Isn't it just absolutely absurd that we don't remember Andersonville and the absolute atrocities that the Confederacy did to U.S. servicemen? Why, you may ask? It's because they wanted to clear history. They wanted to make the Civil War seem like a war that was just fought between brother and brother over states' rights, when in reality, it was fought over states' rights to have slaves, and the South, the Confederates, could care less about U.S. lives. They let them starve in Andersonville, let their corpses sit out in Andersonville next to their comrades. And when those U.S. servicemen tried to escape the hellhole they were in, they were executed without a second thought. So, when you see those Confederate flags on the back of trucks, remember, those people also had a concentration camp against Americans. This has been the Continuum.